So, you now certainly, I would say, lead probably the largest community of carnivore dieters, and I think it would be great to get into a little of the advanced stuff. I think much of our audience knows about carnivore, knows the basics of it, but I'd love to touch a little bit on the 400 level carnivore diet. What are some of the challenges that you see people having, and maybe we can start getting into some of the maybe not obvious conditions that show improvement with carnivore diets as well. But let's start with what are some of the common challenges that within your community come up for people doing the carnivore diet?
Well, I think, one of the nice things about it is it's a very simple diet. I mean, it doesn't require a lot of calculation and, planning. It's, hey, I can pull a steak out of the freezer and eat it, and so that works for many of the people. And there's something like that. But what I've seen over time is, there seems to be some people where certain, I guess, habits tend to work better than others. I mean, I think one of the biggest things, when you're thinking about, a carnivore diet is, it's a lot of meat basically, and there's not much to it. I mean, there's protein and fat for the most part. And so some people get into how much fat should I consume? How much quantity of food should I consume? What am I trying to solve with this issue? And so I think for what I like to talk about is a lot of people that come to this with the baggage of addiction, food addiction in a lot of cases. It's usually not that they were eating too many broccoli salads that got them obese. It was usually because they were eating the garbage. I mean, the ubiquitous human, pet food, I like to call it, that's out there that tastes great. And it's incredibly addicting, and it's cheap, and it's ubiquitous. And, it's like, how do you get away from that? That's step one, I think, because I think, any person that can remove that stuff from their diet for a period of time will often benefit. And that's why we see success with really anything that's not the standard American diet. And what I find is, so initially for those people, I tell them, you just got to eat enough so you don't want that stuff. Because they're like, well, how much this and that should I eat? And I think step one is just you eat enough so you don't want the cupcakes or the pizzas or the whatever your Oreo cookies or whatever your demon is. And so I think that helps people for the first few months. And then we get into what are you treating? Because I think we've gotten pretty comfortable about treating diabetes with nutrition. I mean, I think most of us will agree that, hey, I can go on a low carb diet and I can improve my glycemic control. And that makes sense from a just basic physiology standpoint. But then you start looking at why are people with autoimmune conditions getting better? Why are people with mental health issues getting better, or neurodegenerative diseases in many cases, or neurologic diseases getting better? And I think you start to see there's different things at play there besides just how many carbs you're exposed to. And so I think that's something that I see in particular. I see some people where they just eat mounds and mounds of fat, which can sometimes be counterproductive in some cases. I mean, we see people, they're told, hey, I'm supposed to be eating sticks of butter with my food, like the old ketogenic diet where you had people that were, putting all this fat on everything. And I think it's beneficial for a subset of the population. I think people with neurologic and, mental health issues, that seems to be that they do better a little bit on a higher fat side of things, at least for a period of time. It may not be a permanent situation, but if we look at things like, for instance, MS, and we've had a lot of success with multiple sclerosis, which is a horrible, horrible disease, particularly as it progresses, and a lot of people die early from it, and it's a significant problem with quality of life. We know that from both animal and human studies that it is almost impossible to remyelinate damaged nerves, and one of the hallmarks of multiple sclerosis is a demyelination that occurs. And so myelin is the kind of the insulation that kind of surrounds the nerve endings. It's made out of fat basically. And so we know that animal studies show that without exogenous cholesterol, and the only place you can get exogenous cholesterol or dietary cholesterol is in animal products. Animal cell membranes have cholesterol, in which plant walls cell walls don't. And so that's one of the hallmark differences between animal food and plant food is the presence of cholesterol. And we've been told for, 50 years, oh, cholesterol is bad for you, and then, 2015, the U.S. dietary guidelines said, hey, dietary cholesterol is not the problem. It doesn't seem to have an impact on our serum cholesterol, which is a whole nother topic, which Phil, I'm sure you've explored, ad nauseum probably at this point. But so we see that, like for instance, MS, I have a number of MS people that we see, and they almost universally do better on a skewed higher fat approach for a period of time. So that's different. Whereas, you might see someone with, obesity is their main concern. They may not need so much fat. I mean, fat is certainly important. And when I say low fat, I'm talking like 60% of your calories are coming from low fat. I mean, in the context of a carnivore diet, I mean, I eat a ribeye steak and people will say, oh, that's a lot of protein. But, in real reality, 60, 75% of those calories are coming from fat. So I'm eating, what I consider moderate fat for a carnivore diet, whereas there's people that skew where they're 80, 85, maybe even 90% of their calories come from fat. And these are the people that have neurodegenerative problems, MS, some of the mood disorders where they tend to require that at least for a period of time. And it might be a few years even. And then they sort of kind of normalize to what I think is 60 to 80% of your calories coming from fat, which I think seems to be the spot for most people. It's pretty hard to, survive on 50% or less fat in the context without carbohydrates. Now you add carbohydrates in the mix and certainly you can bring that number down. And I don't, again, even though I'm a proponent of a carnivore diet, I don't think everybody needs to be doing that. I think many people, one thing I will say is meat is, I think, a health food. I think it's an improperly vilified, demonized food that we should have never done that. We should, whenever that happened, 1914 or 1917, when the American Dietetic Association was formed by the Seventh-day Adventists, or when Eisenhower had his heart attack in the 50s, despite the fact that he was smoking 3 to 4 packs of cigarettes a day, or, whatever, Ansel Keys, or the U.S. dietary guidelines, with George McGovern, blah, 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 whatever that was. I mean, I think it was incorrectly done. And I think we've been suffering the consequences of that ever since that time. Some of the other things, I mean, I think women, just like men, women versus men, I think women, again, maybe skew a little bit more slightly higher fat. So maybe instead of 60% calories, they need 65% of their calories from fat. Women are fatter than men. I mean, that's just one of the realities of the differences in the sexes. Women carry more body fat from men, and there's reasons for that. Maybe they have more developed brains. I don't know, jokingly, but
there you go. I think we've solved it.
I mean, they would probably attest to that. But I mean, it's interesting because, what's interesting, if you look at the difference between human physiology and like dogs is another example. I have dogs and I feed them a carnivore diet. Dogs, there's actually there's feeding studies on dogs where they self-select foods. They self-select their macronutrients, and they'll put fat, protein, and carbs down. And dogs initially will eat a high-fat diet, a relatively high-fat diet, something like 70% fat. And then after a week or so of that, they'll automatically revert to a much leaner diet. And the reason for that, and they'll consume almost no carbohydrate. The reason for that is because dog's brain size is much smaller than ours. I mean, it's just, for its body size, a dog has a very, like a brain the size of kind of like a walnut, or, maybe slightly a large walnut, whereas we have, a brain that's, 2.5, 3 pounds or something like that, 2% of our mass, but, 20 something percent of our energy production goes to our brain. So it's interesting. Those are some of the things I've seen. Some of the other things that I think are a little more, maybe not the average person sees, because like I said, I've been doing this now for 7 years, and I literally spend every single day of my life meeting with people on this diet and seeing what works for them, what doesn't work for them, what's unique about them. I think there's differences, like I said, like I mentioned, between men and women. I think there's differences between, the age, and the athletic, maybe the desires of the particular person. I am a very protein centric person. That is, I think protein is incredibly important. I think just in general across the board, Americans don't get enough protein. I think the RDA is woefully abysmally too low. I mean, it's a bare minimum not to basically fall apart, you know, with the 0.8 per kilogram. And so I tend to push for more protein in the context. And then I also try to push people to exercise and maintain lean mass and put on lean mass, regardless of age and sex and other things. And so I think, again, you might have to, you know, in the absence of carbohydrates, you know, because we talk about the fact that, you know, low carbohydrates in general tend to drive insulin secretion down to a degree. You know, we know that, you know, certainly carbohydrates are pretty good at causing insulin release. We know that protein kind of has a moderate effect, and fat tends to be a little less, you know, it tends to be fairly low with regard to that. And so one of the things we know that carbohydrates and insulin can do, there seems to be no advantage to adding carbohydrates to protein when it comes to muscle protein synthesis, but there may be some advantage when it comes to muscle protein breakdown. So if you don't have carbohydrates, you might have to eat protein over and above that for muscle protein synthesis, over and above which, you know, if you talk to guys like Don Layman, Stu Phillips, and some of the other big names in protein, would recommend 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram. But then you see some people where their recommendations might be higher at 2.2, even as high as 2.6. And I think, again, as you drop the carbs, those numbers may go up.